Welcome everyone to another webinar here presented to you by Affinity Management Services. We're super excited to be on today. We have a webinar specifically talking about finding that right balance between fair and consistent HOA violations, part two. We had a huge success in part one with Emily, and we received a lot of emails, a lot of Q&As. So we thought it would only be fitting that we host another webinar. Go into a little bit more into the weeds, talk a little bit more about, certain challenges that happened. In the first webinar, we really touched on defining the definitions of what covenants and conditions are. We touched on enforcement rights, finding processes, and the legal implications obviously involved with all of that. So in this one, we're going to dive a little bit deeper, going into a little bit more of the weeds, as mentioned earlier, talk a little bit about technology, how it can help you, and just give you some more insight. So before we get started, we're going to make it a little bit interactive. I do have 2 to 3 polls that we'll be launching throughout the webinar. So if you see it, it'd be great if you can participate so we can get some information and see where you lean on the discussion that we're having. And also, we're going to open the Q&A. So if you have any questions related to the topic, please place them there. We'll do our best between Emily and I to answer them either live or in text format, whichever is easier. If we're unable to get to it, we apologize ahead of time. There is a lot to get through within 1 hour, but we're going to do our best. So with further ado, I have the great pleasure of having here again from KBR, Emily Gannon. So Emily, you want to say a little bit something about you and the firm?
Thanks, Raphael. Hi, guys. So I'm Emily Gannon, as Raphael said, from KBR. This is all we do. We're an association firm. All we do is represent the associations pretty much. Sometimes developers or individual owners, but for the most part, so don't get mad at me if you're individual owners. We generally represent the associations, and we're sort of on the side of the board, so to speak. But I swear we're here to help you too. So this is all we do. We've been doing it for a long time now. I've been with the firm. I think this is my 12th year. I'm one of the partners. Been practicing since 2005, although I tend to ignore that because now it sounds so long ago. But here we are. So anyway, I know we said in the first session we sort of did the basics and covenant enforcement, and it is it sounds sort of basic because it's covenant enforcement, right? So this is what we do kind of every day, but it does get a little more complicated. There are some things to consider, some caveats, some sort of technicalities here and there. So we couldn't cover everything in an hour. So we said let's do it again, and we'll get into some more of the the details and the nitty gritty, or get into the weeds, as Raphael said. So I know that's what we're here to do tonight or today. We covered the basics already a little bit, just to reiterate. So when we say covenant enforcement, basically we mean, how do we enforce the restrictions you have in your governing documents? So how do we enforce the age restrictions, the pet restrictions, the architectural guidelines, things like that, things that are in your declaration, things that might be in your rules, how those work together, which has sort of precedence, which may control, things like that. And yeah, we can get into some of it. And I know you guys said, you mentioned technology, and that's where, Raphael, I'm going to lean on you, because I know you guys are way more tech savvy than I am. And Affinity is technologically advanced, which is very convenient for its clients. So you can fill me in on that portion. But yeah, where do we start? Where do we want to go today?
Great, excellent. Well, what we'll do is, again, everyone, the Q&A is open. If you need a clarification because maybe you weren't able to attend our first session, just go ahead and type that question in there. We'll be happy to chime in and provide some further clarification. The video is up on both of our YouTube channels, so if you want to watch that video, you're welcome to do so. So I think we should get started. We spoke a lot on the first webinar of what can happen. What happens if a violation is done. But I think we didn't get into like strategies that, an HOA can basically employ to handle challenging enforcement scenarios. So, I think what happens many times with these grievance committees and with board members is, they have a challenge of which ones to enforce, which ones not to enforce. So maybe if you can kind of give them from a legal side, where's a good starting point? And if not, should they just go all at it if they're new? Because we're in the midst of election season for some
Right.
associations. And some of them are just, look, we're running because these roofs are just in bad shape or whatever it may be. So I guess maybe giving them a starting point of how they should start the process if they're new to it.
Right. And so, and right, like you said, we are in election season. I was at a meeting till, 10 o'clock last night. And it's, an all new board. So I know it happens. This is the time of year. If you're new to your board, congratulations or condolences. That's the running joke, right? Sorry. We appreciate how hard it is. We do. I know it's a volunteer position and you do it because your home is probably your biggest asset and you want to protect it. And we appreciate that. In HOAs, obviously, again, the priority is you want your neighbors to also keep their homes up so you protect your property value. It all goes together. It all works together. So it makes sense. You want your neighbors to be doing the right thing so that your home keeps its value. So that's why the enforcement is important, especially in an HOA. Now, and the flip side of that is we have a lot of new residents in South Florida who seem to, kind of have that mentality of, this is my home, you can't tell me what to do.
Correct.
That's the fun balance we have to work with. And hopefully people are getting a little more educated on the fact that if they bought into an HOA, the association can tell you what to do. You're bound by these documents. They run with the land. These are covenants that you're stuck with, so to speak. So now if you're a new board, you're coming in, you don't really know what we're doing. Maybe you did run on a platform of we want to start enforcing everything. We want to clean up our neighborhood, something like that. You got to start with, well, let's take a look. Where are we? Let's see what the status is sort of across the board. Are we going to maybe modify some rules? Maybe the things that you thought when you were running that should be, enforced aren't enforceable for various reasons, or maybe aren't even in your rules and you just thought they were because it sounds like something that should be in your rules. So sort of start at ground zero. Look at your governing documents, look at your rules, start there, see what you actually have as restrictions. And then and talk to management, get your management involved, because obviously they're going to know the history here. Why aren't we enforcing XYZ? Why does it say we can't have trucks in the community, but I see trucks in everyone's driveway? And there could be reasons for that. Maybe, again, we sort of lost our way somewhere through the years and now we don't enforce it anymore. Or maybe, again, it wasn't properly recorded. It wasn't properly whatever it could be. There could be many scenarios, but sort of get an understanding of where you are before you just sort of come in gung ho. We're going to blast violation notices to everybody and clean up the neighborhood. That's not the best start. Come in, get an understanding, work with your management team, see what the deal is. And again, these are different types of violations we could be talking about. It could be a maintenance issue, could be just like we said, a truck or a pet or something like that. And again, there could be reasons. There could be something that the prior board was working on. Well, we did tell Mr. Smith he has to clean his roof. And he actually showed us he has a company coming out next 2 weeks from now. They couldn't get here earlier because of the rain or whatever it is. So, something like that. Okay, so we don't have to send Mr. Smith another nasty gram, so to speak. Sort of get your bearings, start there, and see what, and management again is going to be your best friend with this because they're going to have the history. They're going to know what's going on. Start there and then sort of figure out where we go.
Yeah, no, that's correct. And what I will say if especially for the newer boards that just got in and they want to, do what's right, do what the documents state, I guess that's the way I should say it. You have to look at a lot of things. And I think the way Emily mentioned it of having a sit down is, too many associations, board members, when they're getting into it, they're not looking at this as like a business. Okay. So in any business, for instance, this is my business. In my business, we have 1, 3, 5, and 7 year goals and so forth. So if this is a big goal of yours, let's sit down, let's have that discussion. Because as you said earlier, the circumstances can be different for different communities. So if, some communities may be, okay, it's just the landscaping that's a little bit awry, not a big deal. But you have some communities where they've had roof that hasn't been done. You have oil stains in the driveway. You have landscaping. So you have to look at this from a global perspective, from a 30,000 foot first. Okay, what would happen, management, if we sent everyone violations. Does the staff have the bandwidth to be able to measure it? We'll touch up on technology because sending the violations is pretty easy. That's not the hard work. It's what comes after. Do you have the bandwidth to be able to answer the calls? Because the last thing you want to do is be able to send all these violations and then not have a good, what, you know, like a service level agreement to say, okay, we're going to respond within 24 hours to all of these requests because the goal is to be able to get it done. So yes, I think you mentioned it great. Yes, we couldn't get into it. We could go full blast because of the tools that are available to us, but there has to be a strategy and an approach to it, because if you're a property that has a portfolio manager, good luck.
Right.
If you're a property that has an on-site with just one manager, a little easier, but still tough. But if you have a team, now that's a different story. So there's going to be a different approach to different types of properties. So I think you nailed it on the head there.
And you can sort of almost soft launch these things.
Yes,
You
that's
know,
correct.
maybe again, if you're a new board, and like you said, maybe it's something where you've noticed just landscaping stuff hasn't been properly, you know, attended to, and you're noticing it in the community. Maybe before you send, you know, a targeted violation notice, see if your manager could just maybe send out sort of a little memo, a cover letter, or a reminder. Hey guys, we've noticed, you know, it looks like the landscaping in the community is you know, falling below the criteria we would like and the standard we would like. Everyone, if you could take a look and, you know, address it sort of before we have to send any violation notices. And that way you don't get hopefully you don't get the big backlash of 100 owners calling calling the manager the next day. What do you mean? I did trim that bush. I did replace that hedge, and, you know, like you said, sort of overwhelming your manager.
Yeah, correct. I mean, that's one of the things that we try to do here. If let's say we're new to a community or it's a new board and this is the direction they want to take, you know, just give a courtesy notice. At the end of the day, these are your neighbors and these are your residents. Just say, look, these are the common violations that we're seeing. We're going to give you everyone 30 days, just a general communication if you're starting from scratch. And this is what's going to be expected of you. Please read your CCNRs. Hopefully you have a link to the association website of where they're found. But yeah, just giving them that courtesy notice. And, you know, Bruce asked a great question here. Bruce is asking, he's like, we've been advised that even if violations have been overlooked for years, a new HOA management company or board can come in and cite them all. Is that correct?
Well, complicated, little more complicated than that. Can you come in and cite them? Sure.
Yeah.
Now, realistically, are you going to be able to enforce them? That adds a new layer of complication there. And again, it sort of depends on what the violation is, what the situation is. If it's something where, and I think we may have touched on this last time, but essentially, if it's a violation that you have not enforced as an association, the board has not enforced it, and it could be the prior board, doesn't mean you if you're a new board, but you inherit what they did too. That's just how it works. If the prior board wasn't enforcing something, you may now be in a bad position where you can't enforce it the same way, in terms of you may be against an affirmative defense of waiver or selective enforcement or something along those lines, which is essentially you didn't enforce it for so long. So now you can't, and you've lost the opportunity to do so. And you can't enforce against me, basically. And that is an affirmative defense that will come up either because it's been too long or because you enforced against, you know, not against someone, and now you're trying to enforce against me. Those are the two, the selective enforcement and waiver that we hear all the time. And that may be the case. If it's basically been, if that violation's been active for a year or so and the board knew or should have known, and you can't say, well, but we didn't know because they live at the end of the cul-de-sac and no one on the board goes that way. We never drive by their house. That's not going to cut it. If they planted that tree a year ago and they weren't supposed to, or they didn't get the approval they were supposed to, and it's been there for over a year and you didn't do anything, you might have a problem now. Now, it's not the end of the world. I mean, we could republish, we can send, and that requires basically, again, working with your management team, sending out a notice to everyone and letting them know, hey, we're going to start enforcing this violation or this provision and these violations on X date. If you have already violated this, essentially, and this is again the term nobody likes to hear, but we may have to let them be grandfathered in. If you've already sort of missed the boat and you can't be enforcing that one provision, again, because of the time that's elapsed, you have to let those owners now be grandfathered in, register their violation with you, And then you can enforce going forward after a certain sort of new line in the sand has been drawn. So new time frame, new date, and now you've cleaned the slate and you can enforce it going forward. If those people who have the violations don't register in time, then you can treat it as a new violation and you can pursue it. Like I said, you could send those initial violation notices, but there is the risk that that owner is going to come back to you and say, oh, no, 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 it has been too long. I get
Correct.
to keep my, whatever it is, unapproved tree or whatever.
Correct. And Paul makes a comment here and he says, that no one reads the documents and that's the start of it, really. If
I
you're a new
know.
board, it's true that now, board members need to get certified. They'll either sign a simple affidavit and whatnot. So hopefully the new legislation will change a lot of that.
Yeah.
But yes, that is a start. And Jeff brought up an excellent point here as well in the Q&A that it should be from the top down. So what that means for our listeners is realtors are actually required by law within 3 days of having an executed document to provide you, an executed contract to provide you the documents for the association. And unfortunately, the reality is that just does not happen. So don't want to just blame the realtors. Maybe they need additional education as well, like what we do within our industry. But yes, that should be the perspective, because before you go with guns blazing, you want to, again, taking that business approach of, what are the challenges that we're going to come across? What are the violations that are not being done? Now, I want to bring it back again because I
And
want to go.
that works both ways too, because I've seen it where, boards have told me, hey, we have this restriction, there's no leasing for the first year, whatever it may be.
Mhm.
And can you send this person a violation notice? And I look through the docs and I said, is there an amendment that maybe I didn't get, or that maybe
Yeah.
somehow it wasn't properly recorded? What am I not seeing? Because I don't see that restriction anywhere in here, guys. And then the board will tell me, oh, we didn't know it's not in there. We've just always told people we can't rent for the first year. So it is very important for the board and the owners, and you guys are all sort of charged with having the knowledge of what's in your governing documents. They are recorded. You are on notice of what those restrictions are. So, again, it sort of works both ways. Oh, I didn't know we couldn't have, whatever, commercial vehicles in this community, versus, oh, that's just something we've always enforced. We didn't realize it was in the governing, it wasn't in there.
And that's why you're supposed to read your documents,
Right.
especially,
Please read them.
being a leader of your community. And this goes both for my managers that are on the call as much as as the board members, because we can't lose sight to that. Because I know many times, we're here to serve and we lose sight to that because we're just so busy, and you should reference the documents to at least know, okay, I'm going to send a valid violation, which in reality, the statute does require you to reference the CCNR that you're sending them the violations. So,
Right.
now, when we're dealing with these intricacies where we have, in the situation where you do have someone that's had, let's just use the example that happens many times, is maybe they closed off a window and they closed a back porch area that wasn't permitted. How does a board deal with these unique circumstances and avoid compromising, let's say, anything moving forward to what the community standards are supposed to be?
Right. So, and that's an important question, because that's the whole thing. We don't want you to get in a position where now you have an enforcement problem going forward because you're not properly addressing one that you have in front of you now. So, and that's why we always tell you guys, you do have a fiduciary duty. You are supposed to be enforcing your governing documents. You are supposed to be enforcing your covenants, even though, again, I understand that might make you sort of the bad guy in the neighborhood. You might not make, be best friends with all of your neighbors, but that's what you've signed on for, and that's the deal. Now, if it's something like that, a challenging situation where there's maybe an unpermitted something or addition or whatever it may be, a couple of complications here. Last year, now there was a new change to the statute that most of the attorneys and practitioners hate, because it is strangely written and has many questions about how we're really going to enforce it, or the way it's going to be, I guess, interpreted. Because essentially it says you can't enforce a covenant that prohibits people from putting anything in their backyard that you can't see from
Right.
the side or the front of the home. So that obviously comes into play when we talk about, and then that's complicated when we talk about maybe villa homes or townhomes, or how that works. Because what if your neighboring, lot is essentially can see your backyard, but it's not from the street, but it's not from the side. they didn't think this through. So, does that mean now we can't have our restrictions in place that you can't put maybe a shed in the backyard? That was a big one. That's a big issue now we're having with people saying, we've always had a rule, we've always had strict guidelines, no sheds, no outbuildings, no, nothing like that. And now this law came into place and it's okay, so can we still enforce that? How does that work? Many questions now about that.
Yeah.
So now if we're talking about something where it's an architectural change that maybe, again, in normal circumstances, and sort of putting that law aside for a minute, would have required, an ARC approval, go through your committee, all of that, and they didn't, and you discover that they've done this change and it wasn't proper, start with your violation notice, give them a chance to submit their plans, so to speak, and whatever it is that you would normally do for an ARC approval, whatever your ARC approval process is. And now, again, if they don't have permits, or if you think there was something that wasn't done properly in terms of code or anything like that, the other option is, I mean, you guys aren't code, but you could always call them.
Yeah.
And you can always sort of, give them a tip that you think somebody's doing work without a permit. And that's another way to kind of, and I don't mean to say it in a way where you're kind of, you're getting yourself out of it, but it is sort of a way to let code take care of it and let the association sort of take a step back. And we hear that a lot because the association doesn't want to spend the money usually. So if code will handle it, great. Then we can just, we can take a step back and let them deal with it. Sometimes that is easier. I mean, as a practical matter. So it really depends. It depends on what's going on and what they've done. You don't want to, again, sort of let it happen because you don't want to spend the money or you don't want to get the attorneys involved. Because again, now you're going to put yourself in a spot where you may not be able to enforce that same restriction going forward. And if we're talking about something like ARC guidelines, that if you sort of let those go, so to speak, and you don't enforce them properly, your whole community's, the nature of all of your homes may change and the look of the community and all of that. And that, that could take that's a slippery slope.
100%. And many times, many times people move into communities because of either the appeal that it had or the way that it looked, the curb appeal and so forth. So
Right.
What's great to see after I ran that poll while you were responding to that question of the standards is that 55% of the people that answered the poll actually have a grievance committee. So that's good. We also noticed that a little bit low, 23% of them hold regular meetings. We can talk about that. But the guideline issue, talking about the guidelines, which you just brought up, it's great to see that 90% of them that took the poll actually have guidelines. And the reason why guidelines are so important because that goes back to the initial question, which is having those community standards. Because if you have the guidelines as a board or as a management team, then you know what, it makes your life for the committee much easier, as well as for your board of directors when having to make a decision of should an architectural be approved or not.
Right.
The more clarity you have,
That's what I
the
was gonna say.
easier it is for the entire full circle for applauding someone for having it done, for someone that applies for it, this is what needs to get done, and for sending a violation and you close that entire loop. So
Right. And really, guys, the law requires, if you're going to be reviewing architectural changes, that you do have guidelines, criteria, standards. And I know I see the old, sort of the old language that's in a lot of declarations where it just sort of says, in conformance with the community appearance or something like that, some sort of generic kind of vague term. And then the board will say, great, we have full discretion. We can just decide which changes we like, which changes we don't. That's risky, guys, because if you don't approve something and you may have an owner on the other side who says, well, why'd you deny it? And then, you don't really have a real reason.
Yeah.
If you have guidelines and specific criteria, we only approve, fences that are wood, shadow, whatever, or
Correct.
6-foot white PVC fences, these are our paint colors. These are the roofing materials we approve. If you have all of that laid out, that makes everything much, much easier.
Correct.
Everyone knows what they're allowed to do and what they're not allowed to do. And hopefully then the applications you're going to get are going to be already probably, meet your criteria already. And like we said, it just makes the whole process much, much easier and much clearer and faster and less subject to any challenges. If you have that sort of language that gives the board some discretion or gives the committee some discretion, in theory, that sounds great because,
Yeah,
maybe we want to have a little discretion.
correct.
But again, if you can't point to exactly why you're denying that application, you may then get a challenge from that owner that you didn't deny it properly and they want to go ahead and paint their house this color pink because you don't have a color palette and it doesn't say I can't paint my house pink somewhere. So, things like that. And you may say, well, but no other houses are pink, or, we don't obviously we don't allow pink houses in this community because everyone else's house is white or gray or whatever it may be. Well, that may be obvious, but if it's not written down, you're going to have a hard time enforcing that. So we want to make sure you really have these criteria, have these guidelines, and be specific with as many details as you can. Paint colors, roofing materials, fence materials, all of those things, as much as you can. It'll just make the whole process much easier for you.
Excellent. And I have a good question here. When you were talking a few seconds ago about, being able to inspect, I have a question from Edwin that asks, can an association or a manager have the right to go into a backyard to check something? Let's say if there isn't an ACC approval for that particular property. And then I'll add in another question that they have here is, can a neighbor's camera point to someone's backyard?
Right. I would be very careful with that. When you're doing your inspections, and Raphael, you can tell me what you tell your
Yeah.
managers,
Yeah.
but I would not suggest going on anybody's lot without permission. You can see most things just by, walking by, driving by. If you have permission from the neighbor who says, hey, come here, I want to show you, you can see through my yard, what Bob over there is doing, then fine. But I wouldn't be walking onto Bob's lot without permission.
Yeah.
It's just, just as a general, in this day and age, I wouldn't be doing that.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a story a couple months ago of an HOA dispute somewhere in Central Florida that a neighbor shot the other neighbor
Got the
because
other neighbor. Sad story. Yep.
he cut his hedges or something. So just be very careful, guys. Be very careful.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, definitely coming onto someone's property without any consent is definitely, you're looking to put yourself in a bad situation. At what I have seen, and I don't remember the legal opinion, so shame on me, but I still think it's important to bring it up. One committee member had a drone. And what they were doing was just flying. They were flying at about 500 feet, even though it's airspace, right? And they were just taking pictures of whoever had illegal gazebos, because this particular community had several illegal gazebos. So there's definitely creative ways of doing it. I don't remember, because I do remember us saying, well, let's get a legal opinion on that before you just start flying this drone into other people's side. But yeah, now let's kind of switch gears here a little bit. Many times, let's say if a resident, because we do have some residents on this call, can a resident appeal, let's say a violation? So let's say that there was a violation for, let's give a hypothetical here. I think for a roof, it's pretty black and white. This is the roof. But let's say a tone of white or a tone of yellow, or maybe the grass should be it's 7 inches instead of 5 inches. How can an owner appeal, let's say, a violation that they've received?
And that is tricky. I'm going to be honest with you, because and we hear this a lot from owner attorneys and attorneys that are, or just individual owners who then, because again, we're usually sending the letters on behalf of the associations, guys, full disclaimer here. So, I'll hear it back in the response of, that's not what it is. It's, let me explain, and whatever it is. And now again, you can respond to the violation and explain why you think the association is wrong, or why you think and the manager's picture is not the right picture, or it was taken on the wrong day and my grass has been cut since then, whatever it is. Now, again, if it's a normal violation and you've corrected it, or again, there was some sort of mistake, respond to the violation notice and simply explain it. And hopefully it goes away and problem solved. Initially, again, for the violation, the goal of the association is not to make money off of you. They're not trying to fine you to get your $100. They are only fining you to get you to fix whatever the problem is. So if you can respond and say, I fixed the problem, or there was no problem because this is all a big misunderstanding, or whatever it may be, then great, everybody wins. So, in terms of a formal appeal, there really is no process in the statute. It's really more a question of, and maybe there's something in your governing documents sometimes with the fining procedure. There'll be something in your governing documents that indicates that you could sort of appeal, or you could challenge, or you can ask the board for a second opinion or something
Yeah.
like that from the grievance committee or from the finding committee. That's not in the statute though. So there really is no formal appeals process. It's really just, I would recommend you guys just respond to the management company in writing. If you do have a finding committee or grievance committee hearing, go attend the hearing, bring pictures, bring, supporting documentation to explain why this is all a mistake, or why this should, why you shouldn't be fined, or whatever it may be. That's what that hearing is supposed to be for. That's your
Right.
opportunity to speak and to give your side of the story.
Right.
So there's not really a formal appeal, so to speak, but again, if you think this is not right, give them the documentation, give them the support, and hopefully, again, if you've cured the covenant, everybody wins.
Correct. And in my opinion, there, to add to what Emily's mentioning, is I think this goes back to what we were talking about initially, which is the architectural guidelines. So where you find that you have these gaps, if you're finding yourself in this kind of situation where you're always having to clarify something, in my opinion, then it means that you need more clarity within your guidelines. So if it's a white, here's the color code. You have Sherman-Williams of the world, you have Behr Paint of the world, and they're specialized in our space. So they, owners can log in and know, okay, these are the color palettes, these are the color sequences that are permitted within our community, and that eliminates any of those questions. Now, there are going to be certain scenarios where, of course, you can't be super clear, but we had an association that was even as crystal clear as putting in the measurements of how the French windows need to be and the company who you needed to use. Like, they went to that extent. That can get gray when you're only recommending one company, but either way, they had those kind of guidelines. So I would recommend, if you're finding yourself in those situations, to just take the time with the board and then possibly sit down with the attorney of, okay, we need to make an amendment, and these are the changes that we'd like to see within the documents. And if it's just for guidelines, then we want to make those changes within the guidelines. Now,
There's 800 different versions of white.
oh my goodness. Oh my goodness.
So that might be fine if we just say, only white houses in this community, but you're opening up a can of worms there.
Can of worms. Yep, that's correct. That's why it's better to have those specific color codes. Now, Emily, is there ever like a situation where they can temporarily waive, let's say, a covenant restriction? And what would you say the process would be in doing so? I know this is very.
I know, guys. And I know you want me to say, sure, we can make exceptions and there's hardships and all of that. And in theory, you can, yes, you can basically allow a violation to happen. And then, as we touched on before, then republish your restriction. So now you've sort of cleaned the slate and started a new time frame to go forward. But we don't suggest it. You are supposed to be enforcing these covenants. So, to make an exception is sort of it's a dangerous game.
Yeah.
You can, but again, you may also, and it's rare, but you may get an owner who then complains that you're not properly enforcing your covenants, and wants to take action against the board for that. So it's really not recommended. If it's a situation where you had a problem with enforcement for whatever reason, again, maybe an age issue or a selective enforcement waiver kind of thing, or you've talked to your attorney and your attorney has told you for whatever reason, hey guys, this is not, you don't have a strong case here. You got to let this, whatever the situation is, we really don't think we can enforce here. Then fine, then you're sort of stuck and your hands are tied and you have to let the violation be. But if it's just, hey, can I just have an exception, please? Because I really want to keep my truck here, or whatever it is. I wouldn't suggest doing that. You really, it opens up a can of worms, and now you're going to have others that are going to want to do it. And you're just going to be hearing nonstop, well, why'd you let them do it and not me? And and you're just going to make your lives more difficult. You might want to make an exception. I understand. We hear it all the time. Hardship exceptions. I've had owners come to board meetings, and I think this one was a condo, but same idea. They wanted to, the condo was owned by their parents. The parents had passed away. This person now inherited it. They didn't live here. They lived out of state. They basically said, I can't afford it. I have to rent it. Otherwise it's going to be foreclosed on. I don't know, while we're trying to figure out sort of the finances, can you please let us rent it? And there was a rental restriction and there was a rental moratorium. And essentially the board said, can we let them, even though this is the violation? And in that case, they ended up deciding no, because other people are going to want the same exception and the same special treatment. And it's going to make your life a lot more difficult. Again, could you do it, or could there be a case where then we reinstate sort of the violation? Yes, we can republish it. We can go forward. But in that time that you have to let that person register their violation, someone else might do the same thing. And now you have to let them do it too. So
Correct.
it's a dangerous game to play.
Yeah, and what I want to add there, and it's not just to plug Emily and her firm, but it's just how important it is to contact the attorney in these kinds of situations. I can't emphasize it enough. I had a similar situation with an association a couple years ago where the city was requiring the variance to be approved by the association, not just the neighbors, but the association as well. And because of that, the association decided to deny the variance because it would allow the pool to be a little bit closer to the backdoor neighbor, even though the backdoor neighbor approved it. And the reason why the association made that decision is because they didn't want to be the one in any other variances that they were the one that, well, you approved this one, you didn't approve this
Yep.
one. Listen, we don't care that all your neighbors approved it. We're going to say no, because then that means we have to say yes to everybody. And then they'll leverage that the association said yes. How come the backdoor neighbor didn't say yes? If the
Right.
backdoor neighbor said no, so it puts the association in a bad situation. So, and Jeff puts an interesting comment in the chat about the FAQ. And the FAQ, what we're talking about is the FAQ on your association website, assuming you have an association website, which if you have 150 units, you should have one. In reality, I think all associations should have one. But you want to put this kind of information up on the website, because if you have this information up on the website, then eliminates a little bit of that back and forth, hopefully, and you can direct residents, whether you be a manager or a board, to what are the frequently asked questions within the architectural. You could have just a full section on your website outlining what are the do's and don'ts, or what are the commonly asked questions, so that residents know what to expect from the association, and they don't feel like they're constantly getting different opinions from depending on who they talk to.
Do you guys, Raphael, when you come in, ask them about websites and get everybody sort of up and running? I know HOAs are a little behind the times sometimes, and I say that with affection and love in my heart, guys. But condos were basically forced by statute to create these websites and to do all this stuff. Condos of a certain size. HOAs haven't had that yet, although it may be coming. We'll see. But so I'm always curious to see if HOAs, if a lot of them actually really still have websites or not, or because they're not forced to, if they don't. And again, little behind the times sometimes. So I'm curious what you guys do when you.
Yeah, sure. So we definitely push our HOAs to go that route. We explain to them, look, the condos have this requirement. We should kind of follow it. It's not, we wish the elections were the same, but that's a whole other conversation. But yes, we definitely push it, and I'll tell you why. Number one, we explain to the board that if you can take away, our managers are always busy, no matter whether you're well-planned, structured, organized, there's always things happening. So the only way of alleviating some of that load is by having the information up on the association website. And with all the media attention that our industry has been getting lately, unfortunately, it's been more negative. With records requests, it's much easier to tell a resident, listen, all the contracts, insurances, everything that's required within condos, that's up on your association website, even though you're an HOA. So our goal is, yes, to gradually push our board members there, because, like most board members are always concerned about cost. And they're like, why are you charging me so much for a website? Well, there's maintenance and everything else that's associated with it. But ultimately, if you're providing a tool which allows for much more transparency, much more clarity, and for questions to be answered. I mean, I'm sure if you have a challenge, we're all used to going to Google, now ChatGPT. We're looking for different ways to get our answers quicker. And there's no difference when you're a resident within a community. Some people just don't want to call. They want their answer at the fingertips. So, our industry has always been behind the times. That was one of the benefits of COVID. That board members realize, okay, there's benefits of having online meetings. There's benefits of using Zoom and having this technology. So, yes, we do push our clients, and we have seen it be more accepted. Where it should be a concern is when you have board members that don't, when it's not cost. And, you have to kind of, as a resident, you should be pushing your board member to have websites up.
And it is just easier, like you said. I mean, if you can say, well, I didn't know that those weren't the rules. I didn't know I wasn't allowed to park in guest parking, but. Okay, well, go on our website and all the parking rules are right there for you. Just makes it a little bit easier for everybody.
Sure, and that lead me right into a perfect poll that I had on the technology piece. So if everyone could take some time.
Oh,
And
good. This is where I can lean on you.
Yeah. I was curious to see, how many associations are actually using technology because, the architectural and the violation process can seem pretty overwhelming. However, there's so many tools nowadays that can help you facilitate and make it much easier. So as an example, when we onboard a new client, part of what we do is we grab all those CCNRs and we enter them into a specific system that we use for violations. And what that allows is that the manager doesn't have to be scrambling around at the last minute for the board to send a violation. They could just take a picture, hit send, automatically gets printed. Further, it gives the residents an idea of where they're at. If their home has a violation, if it doesn't have a violation, if they need to apply for an architectural, they can do that. So there's definitely tools out there. If you're a board member or manager, more than happy to share with you the tools that we use that have been working for us in our business, because it could automate the processes in sending that violation and making things easier.
And that helps you track sort of your timeframes too, right? When you send the violation notice and you give them whatever it is, 10 days to fix it, then you're going to know if it, and again, or if the same violation comes up 6 months later, you already have it in your system that this is a sort of a frequent violator, so to speak.
Yep, that's completely, it makes the life much easier because once you have the guidelines that you say, okay, this kind of violation, we're going to give 3 days, this kind of violation, we're going to give 10 days, then you just put that into the system and the manager doesn't have much to think about except, okay, my next round is going to be on this date, and that's when it gets taken care of. More importantly is a preparation for board members and committees and managers when you're having a grievance hearing. I mean, technically, like we like to tell our committees, it's kind of like if you're a judge in its own way, right? You're not saying yes or no,
That's what
but
we say. It's like a little trial.
Little trial. You have to have the documentation. So if you're using the technology, you don't have to waste the manager's time in printing, having the pictures printed. That's cost associated with that, time associated with that. You can just have a TV that now costs $300. And you can just post up, look, this is the picture. This was the first violation. This was the certificate the certified letter that you received. And you have everything at the fingertips. So sharing the results of the survey, we have 52% of the people that responded are not using some kind of online system or technology. And again, I highly recommend it for those associations that are on the call. We're more than happy to share what tools we use that have worked with us. But yes, it's going to make your life much easier. And then it eliminates also the phone call. Did we send that person a violation? You could just log into the system and see if that person received the violation, when did they receive it, at what time they received it, here are the pictures, and so forth. So there's so many tools out there now.
As silly as it sounds, even just the pictures portion, because we get violations that have to do with the driveway's dirty, or the pavers need to be pressure washed, or the sod is dying. And then it's a grainy, bad black and white photo, and the owner says, I have no idea what you just sent me. Are the pavers dirty? I can't tell. So if you do have that technology and you have the photos and all of that, it makes it so much easier.
Correct. And I always relate to businesses because I like board members to think as leaders, because they
You
are
guys are running a business. It is true. You are board members.
And if anything you read in the paper, CEOs, big people, they're making decisions on data. They're driven by the data. So if you see that your management team is overwhelmed, then maybe it's not the team. Many times it's, hey, we've done 150 violations this week. What that generates X amount of phone calls, whether you have a tech platform or not, at least 30% of those people are going to call. So you can structure and understand, okay, do I need a more team, or do I need a bigger team, or do I need to stage out my violations to not overwhelm my team? Because all of this stuff plays into it. And I could talk about this for hours, so I'll try to keep it short, but this goes into burnout. So, many boards are like, well, why does my manager change every 2 to 3 years? Well, have you considered the load that's at the property? Have you considered the amount of violations? Do we get support? Do we not need support, or how do we structure this? So these are the difficult conversations that I'm hoping many of the board members and managers are having with their boards. They're difficult in the sense of you're being open and honest with the board, and you have to have that, because then expectations just don't align. But I can go on about that all day. So
No, I think you make a good point, because,
yeah,
and I'll be honest, from my side, I don't typically think about that, because it's
yeah,
just, okay, I'm telling you, you got to enforce, do your thing, and then
yep,
and so much of it happens before it gets to me. So I don't think about the fact that you're right. You guys might have a manager that sends out 100 violations and gets, 30 owners calling them the next day. And
that's
then
correct.
now the manager's overwhelmed and all of that.
Correct.
It's a very good point.
Correct. And it's not to say that not to do the violation. So I do want to make that clear. It's just more to understand, okay, what's going to be the steps that we're doing? Because if you're in the midst of painting a clubhouse, repaving all the roads, is now the right time to do that. So let's focus on the core violations, roofs, paint, things that people, we do not want them to have different looks,
Right.
so that there's a balance. Or do we have the committee support? So these are the conversations that need to be had. If you're having a challenge with your, if you're self-managed with your team, or if you have a property management company, these are the conversations that you should be having if you have a strong partner in your corner. So in your experience, Emily, and I can give mine as well on that, but how can, HOAs effectively train or empower, the enforcement of these committees to uphold, those standards?
And that's tough, because, and we talked about this a little bit last time too, and I know you had some good suggestions on it. It is hard to be on those committees, because again, you're not really anyone's best friend when you're
Mhm.
sending them a notice and finding them or whatever else. But again, you are doing it for the community, you are doing it for the association, you are doing what is supposed to be done. So sort of keep that in mind. But ultimately, you want your committee members to be on the same page as the board and with management, and sort of, again, have an approach and a strategy that you guys have all talked about. How because we have committee members sometimes that just, maybe they're a little too sympathetic, or they go rogue, or whatever it is, and, oh, I just feel so bad, so I'm not going to impose the fine, and all of that. You really need to encourage them that they do have a job to do, so to speak, and they need to be following the rules. They need to be doing what they, enforcing the rules there. And again, if that's not for them, if they're not comfortable doing that, maybe that's not the role for them, and that's fine too.
Yeah.
And then you don't necessarily want someone, like you said, that maybe is a little too gung ho and is going to nitpick, this one blade of grass was out of place. It's a balance. You want to make sure sort of everybody's on the same page of what we're focusing on, what is a violation here, what our standards are going to be, and make sure everybody is on the same page.
Yep, I would agree. It's no different than selecting a team, that's going to work for you, or an employee. You want to make sure that there's some kind of alignment
Yeah.
between the board and the committee. I always think that it's good to have people that disagree. You don't want everyone to think the same way, or everything has to be unanimous. No, you want to be able to have professional conversations and professional disagreements. So,
Yeah.
so we have a significant amount of Q&A. So I think I'm going to scrap the other questions we have. I'm going to
All
bring up
right.
some questions that we have from our listeners. So Carmen asked, does the board have to share with residents who are on the grievance or compliance committee?
It should, there's no reason for it to be a secret.
Yeah, I would agree.
Yeah.
What I would do is, the statute doesn't, protects board members from having to publish their emails and telephone numbers. I would definitely have their names up there. If you have a management team, then just put any questions or concerns regarding the committee. You could reach out here. Or what we've done as well, if the committee wants access to that, we can, of course, we're a transparent organization. You can create a specific email for the committee, let's say committee at managed by Affinity, or whatever it may be, for that particular committee, and that way they get access to that information. I have here another question from Kelly. And do the changes to guidelines have to be done at a board of directors meeting and documented in the minutes?
Good question.
Yep.
Now, again, typically the way it works, and you'd have to look at your documents, but the guidelines should be generally approved by the board, or developed by the board, and all of that. Sometimes it'll say, the committee can come up with them and then, but I would still say, even if it's sort of the committee's guidelines, the board should then be approving them to make it sort of official. Yes. So and when we're talking about ARC guidelines, that type of thing, arguably it doesn't quite fall exactly under the statute where it says if you're going to adopt a rule that involves lot use or parcel use, it should be a 14-day notice for that board meeting. But I would take the position that ARC guidelines basically involve lot use, and essentially they are rules, even though they're guidelines and not technically rules. So just to avoid any question, to be sort of ultra conservative and avoid any issue, I would do a 14-day notice of a board meeting that they're going to be approving new guidelines or whatever it is. And then once they're adopted, send them out to everybody and make sure everybody knows these are our new guidelines, guys, or these are our updated guidelines, or whatever it is. We put new paint colors, or, Sherwin-Williams changed their palette, so we updated everything, whatever it may be, and send that out to everybody. So that once it's sent out and it's been adopted, now there's no question. You're not going to have, owners saying, well, I didn't know about it. Yeah, you did.
Yeah, you did. Yeah, no, and again, I want to reiterate the importance of this is a team effort. The management team is going to have an understanding of what's been the challenges within the community. The attorney is going to at least review the documents and make sure we have no conflicting language and so forth. So it's important that, when you're going through this process, that you're putting together the team so that you can make sure you're passing these guidelines correctly. I have a question here from Pete. That's a good question. It says, can the finding or grievance committee reject a board levy fine if the board is not consistently fining for the same violation?
That's interesting. So basically, can the committee members sort of point out that the board is not necessarily doing what it's supposed to be doing?
Or can they reject the board levied fine?
Well, it is up to them to impose it or not. So
Yep.
Yes, they do have that authority. Now, the risk, so to speak, is, and I've had this happen before, where a committee basically was appointed by the board and just disagreed with the board about fining for certain violations. The committee didn't like it for whatever reason, and they rejected all the fines for that. And it was only one particular violation, and I can't remember the details of why they took issue with it. I don't think it had to do with a sort of a selective enforcement thing. I think it was almost just well, we don't think people should be fined for that kind of thing. It's almost like a jury nullification equivalent. And once that happened, the board was basically, then they said, well, what do we do? Now our committee's not fining people when they should be fining people when we have this violation going on. And ultimately, I told them, well, you can appoint new committee members.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's correct.
It just depends. If the committee feels that the board is not doing what they need to be doing, that's an interesting sort of take on it.
Yeah. It really is. I mean, at the end of the day, you still have power in the long haul because you could run up for election, because ultimately the board has the right to dismantle a committee whenever they please. So if you're not happy with the direction that a board is taking and you're a committee, that means you're involved, you've given your time. I would say that maybe a change is going to be necessary. Because
that's the
technically,
biggest tip. I'm sure you guys tell people too. Whenever we hear owners that are complaining that this is happening or the board's not doing this or whatever, we say, well, then run for the board. Great, get on the board.
That's it.
Yeah.
I have a question here from Frank, and he says he currently has a situation where a patio enclosure has been for 20 years. It was done 20 years ago. No permits, no approval.
Right.
Now the board wants to do something about it. Can they send a violation for it?
Again, you could send a violation for it. Whether you're going to really be able to take it much further, I don't know, based on those facts. If it's unpermitted, again, maybe we want to make a phone call to another entity and see if they want to get involved. I don't know if it's a situation with, again, sort of a townhome or a villa home or that kind of thing. Sometimes calling code, you could shoot yourselves in the foot. Because now you may end up with a violation against the association. So be careful. But, and it is possible. I mean, ultimately, if it's a situation where that structure shouldn't be there, and again, maybe it's a townhome or a villa situation, if the association's responsible to maintain that exterior, that could be an issue. That could be something where the association has to remove it for whatever reason, even though it's been there for 20 years. So again, lots of different factors that could come into play, but it definitely is not a very neat and clean situation for sure.
Yep. These are the ones, for Frank's probably a manager. These are one of the ones
Yeah.
that, I would say if the board wants to do that, look, it hasn't been done for a very long time. My suggestion is let's get on a quick phone call with the attorney. Let's get the conversation going. What are the different strategies that we're going to take? Okay, let's just get the letter going. So at least we're doing our
Right.
part. Get on a call with the attorney and see what approach we can take to it. But they have to remember that once you're going to be consistent with one person that has a very old violation, most likely, correct me if I'm wrong, Emily, that you're going to recommend doing the same for everyone else because it could be
Yep.
said, quote and unquote, selective enforcement. And that's where it gets a little bit gray.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you never want, the worst thing that happens, you send a letter and then the guy comes back and says, well, wait a minute, the old board approved it. Here's the letter from, 1999 where they told me I could put it up. But if that's the case, great. Now you have a copy of it.
Yep.
You're sort of off the hook. But we have that happen too sometimes where there's just no record of anything and then things come out of the woodwork. So
Yep.
but do a little digging there and see as much information as you can get, see what the real story is
Yeah.
first.
Very tactical the way you said
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
I have a question here from Bruce. Great question. He says, the law requires agendas to be posted for meetings. Does that apply for grievance hearings? Listing the address for those that are potentially going to be fined.
Listing the address. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that you have to include it on the agenda. The addresses, obviously, there is essentially really one agenda item for any grievance
Yeah.
meeting. And anyone can go and whatever. I don't know. That's a good question. I hadn't thought about that.
Yeah.
That change that now the agendas have to be on the notice. Do we have to include the addresses of the violators, so to speak? I mean, you could. I think you could. I don't know that you have to.
Yeah, I would say from our side, what we do is we do put the address. It's not of a shaming tactic,
Right.
more of this is the order.
Just to notice. Yeah.
This is
Yeah.
just an order, and that way it's transparent. We don't put names.
I
We
was gonna
just
say, I would do the address, not the name.
yeah, we don't put
Yeah.
names. We just put the address, or if it's a condo, unit number. If it's a house, then just the address, and that way we know it's just following that
Yeah.
order. I think one of our manager did get challenged, like, why are you trying to shame me? And it that wasn't what we were trying to do. It was just, look, this is the order that we're going to follow, no different than, when you have call to order,
Right.
old business, new business, and so forth. So that's just what we followed. Again, I would definitely consult with your attorney if you want to confirm that, if that's right for you. So we'll take one more question here before we wrap up. Let's say, how do you deal with residents who refuse to accept new and revised bylaws and restrictions, which should be covenants? Can they still be fined for the violation?
Yes. It just and now again, it's and a couple different things. If we're talking about new rules, potentially there's an issue of, well, it only applies going forward. So, that's one thing. If it's, an amended declaration or an amendment to your declaration that puts a clear restriction in there. Again, for the most part, those are all going to apply to you. Even if you are an owner and you've lived there for 20 years and you don't get to say, well, I liked the old declaration better, so I'm just going to follow that one. That's not how it works. Essentially, you're on notice that amendment could be, or that the declaration could be amended at any point in time. And you can, again, when that amendment is floating around and being presented to the owners, if you really don't like it, you can campaign against it. You can try and get your owners, to vote against it, your neighbors. But if it passes and if it's properly done and it's an amendment to your declaration, you're bound by that too. There is a little bit of now of an exception in terms of some leasing restrictions and things like that may not apply if you don't vote in favor of them. But for the most part, any restriction, any declaration amendment that is proper, you don't get to just say, well, I don't like it and I lived here before, so I'm not going to follow it. So it's a regular violation and we would treat it the same way. We would send them the notices and we would take them to court if we really had to.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, people are going to be people. That's just how that goes. So if you went through the protocol in getting this approved, then and going through the steps of having the attorney make the amendments, do what they need to do. I'm sure you communicated it. Hopefully you took a survey probably beforehand. So you have, again, thinking like a CEO, thinking like an owner of a business, you have enough data to say, this is what the community wanted and this is what they were looking for. So if someone is in violation of that, then in violation of it, and you need to follow whatever steps you need to follow.
Right. And you can talk to your attorneys, guys, about what makes the most sense in terms of your amendment. If you have an amendment where maybe you want to sort of allow the current people who have whatever that violation is to keep it, you can write it in that way, that after the effective date, no, we will no longer allow blah, 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 blah. You can do it in that way, whatever makes sense for your community. Talk to, again, your management team, talk to your attorneys, and hopefully that'll help you sort of get it to pass.
Yep.
Yeah.
So you're a rock star, Emily, because we 70%, actually 89% of the listeners were between a 4 and 5 star, and it looks like they want us to do potentially a part 3. We did leave about 36 questions up.
It's a tough one.
Yeah.
We can get into everything basically.
Yeah, that's correct. So what I say we'll do is we're going to share our contact information in case anyone wants to reach Emily or us here at Affinity with if they have the tech questions. Oh, wrong screen. Sorry about that. And that way you can reach us with any questions that you may have. Depending on the questions that we receive, maybe we'll consider having a part 3 on this HOA violation. Definitely was a hit. We did leave 30 questions unanswered, so we apologize ahead of time. But Emily, any last questions any last tips you want to give to our listeners today before we go?
Talk to your attorneys, talk to your management team. There you go.
Excellent. What I would tell you is, listen, I'm a little biased. I'm always protecting the management side, but if you aren't using any technology, make sure that you're talking to your providers. Again, reach out to us if you have any questions of what systems we use, or if you're looking to make a change, we'd be more than happy to have the discussion. But more than anything, thank you for taking the time for being on the webinar today. I know we talked a lot about leadership. It goes to show, whether you're a manager or a board member, that you're on the right track, getting additional education, going into getting self development skills in order to help you be a better leader within your community. So thank you for taking the time, and thank you, Emily, and to your team for being on the webinar with us today.
Thank you, guys.
Have a good one. Bye, everyone.
All right, talk to you soon. Bye.
Bye.